procurement management. So here, we're looking to actually select a seller and award a contract. All right, that's the key output here. All right, so if you remember when we planned procurements, that's where we had make or buy analysis and we got make or buy decisions. We had source selection criteria, you know, in terms of how we would choose a vendor, what's their technical approach, do they have some type of, you know, proprietary information or key warranties that we like. We looked at contract types, cost reimbursable, most risk is with us as buyers, same thing with time and materials, whereas fixed price contracts, the risk is with the seller. We looked at all of these things, and then we created procurement documents. We created RFPs so that we could get some folks to do some work for us. We maybe did RFIs to get some information if we're in the middle. We had RFQs for folks, right? And that's a request for quote. Remember, not for qualifications. That would be like an RFI in PMI's terms. And then we also had IFBs, invitation for bid. So we looked at all of these things and we sent those documents out. We put them out there. Now that we're conducting procurements, this is where we want to receive the responses back from people, the proposals. And then we want to use proposal evaluation techniques, select a seller, and then award a contract. And there's 3 steps because you may select a seller, but you know, you might not negotiate to terms. And then you move on to the next one. So that's why there's separate outputs for PMI, selected sellers, and then agreements or contracts. All right, so let's look at this process. All right. In planning, we determined what seller fit our unique requirements. And now we want to obtain this assigned agreement and figure out exactly what's going to happen. All right, so establish a contract here. So what we're doing is we're taking these various plans, including the baseline, the various documents that we may have, and then procurement documentation, separate from a project document. These are the RFPs, RFQs, RFIs. We're going to look at all these. The proposals that actually come back in is now an input. So this is a brand new document that would only, you know, you would only see this in execution because you got to get these from the people who want to do work for you. EFs and OPAs. We'll take those into account when we're buying because we still got to take into account like taxes and exchange rates and, are we buying online or are we buying across, state lines, etc. Tools and techniques. We're going to talk about bidder conferences, proposal evaluation techniques, and then the outputs. We'll select the seller and then we'll award a contract. We may request change. We may update our approach. We see that in the plan updates. We may update our documents. Okay. Do you guys see the slides? Am I back on sharing the? Okay. I don't see the little green line around it right now. All right. So the key output here, a contractual agreement is established with the selected sellers that offers the best value in satisfying the requirements defined in the procurement SOW. Remember this from PMI. Anytime you sign a contract with another party, they become a key stakeholder to your project. So the contractual agreement is bigger than just the fact that they need to perform some work in exchange for, financial compensation. It now comes to the point that they are a key stakeholder within your project, which means that you have to manage them, you have to be able to communicate with them, you have to develop them as a team member. If it's not just, exchange of let's say materials or supplies, but it's actually work. You have to take that into account. And so we'll see this here, acceptance criteria, how we're going to have dispute and change request methods, because what you're going to have with the vendor is going to be different than your change methods within your project. And so, and just a little note down there from PMI as well. The person authorized to sign the legal agreements is often a purchasing or legal representative and not the PM. So there's a few times that the PM is not responsible. Let me back it up real quick. I know we're in procurements, but I'm going to back it up. There's 3 times where the project manager is not responsible, meaning that when you take the exam and it asks you who is responsible, it's always going to be the PM except for these 3 scenarios, okay? The first one we saw when we were planning risk responses, and that's a risk owner. right? The project manager is not responsible for implementing risk responses, the risk owner is. And so make a note of that, either mentally or write that down, because that's one of the three. Okay. The second time the PM is not responsible is conflict resolution. Even though we looked at the 5 conflict resolution techniques, when stakeholders have issues with each other, they are responsible for resolving those disputes in the first instance. And if they cannot resolve those disputes in the first instance, then it gets escalated to the PM. All right, so we have risk owners implementing risk responses, PM's not responsible. And then we have conflict resolution in the first instance, the PM's not responsible. The third one is going to be procurement negotiations. The PM is not responsible for procurement negotiations. Usually this is done by legal or supply chain or purchasing or whatever your company calls it. There are some instances where you as a PM, maybe an owner's rep, or you're actually executing contracts and you're finding vendors. But for the most part, majority of PMs, they don't do that. And PMI wants you to know that, because the questions, the way the questions will be asked, you're not going to be, when I say the PM's not going to be responsible for that. And so I just wanted to take a moment to mention those 3 times, so you have an opportunity to write those down. And now coming back to this process of conduct procurements, so we see getting these agreements here, that's where we see the person authorized may not be the project manager. All right, we're going to update our project documents to reflect any contracts that we've assigned. So now maybe in the traceability matrix, if you remember that document that shows this requirement ties back to this owner or source, or this acceptance criteria, or this business value, right? That's what the traceability matrix is for. Now, if you have a vendor who's doing the work, you may need to update that, or, seller specific risk, we would update that in the risk register. So, that's why we just get project documents. It could be a myriad of things. And then the inputs that we would take would be the procurement documentation that we created, right? So the bid documents, the SOWs that we distributed out to those sellers. If we needed to get independent cost estimates, we did those, we would take those into account as well to make sure that the proposals we get back are in line, along with our source selection criteria. And then we also want to get the proposals, the actual proposals that the sellers have, drawn up and responded to. Now, we're going to use some sort of proposal evaluation technique that we'll see. All right, so that's going to come up in a second as far as the tools and techniques. But other inputs, we're going to take other plans that we have on the how, right? Remember our approach, how we're going to proceed. And then in the tools and techniques, we may have a bidder conference. And the bidder conference for PMI does a couple things, specifically questions on the exam. It saves you time. It's the idea. Well, let me describe the bidder conference. Let me see. Maggie, Chris, Ryan, have all of you had a bidders conference? Been to one?
Yes.
Been to one, conducted one. How about you, Dana? I didn't hear. I know you unmuted. Oh, we lost her. That happens sometimes with Zoom, and then you hit the wrong button and it hangs up. She'll dial back in. All right. So for PMI, so I won't go too deep into the bidders conference. For PMI, it does a few things. It saves you time because you can answer a question once, not 50 times. It reduces your liability of litigation for PMI. And this is the idea that, in the bidders conference, if somebody asks a question, well, you tell everybody the response, so that way you're not showing favoritism, right? So that's the idea of the bidder conference from PMI. Right? It saves you time, and it reduces your liability of litigation. Okay, even though it does a whole lot more. Dana, you back?
Sorry, I was trying to answer and I hung up instead.
No worries.
My bad.
So have you been to a bidders conference?
I don't know what are you saying? A what conference?
A bidders conference.
No.
Okay.
I've never been to a bidders.
So let me describe it. So what'll happen is you'll send out an RFP or you'll respond to an RFP. So I'm gonna describe it from the point of I am the buyer. So I'm the buyer and I sent out an RFP, and then a week later I've responded to a couple questions and I posted it up on the site. And I recognize that I'm getting a lot of questions. So I schedule a bidders conference and I alert all the folks who have responded and I put it up on the site, and we're gonna have a bidders conference. So we come in, and what it does, it allow all the prospective vendors and contractors, they'll show up and they'll ask me questions about the statement of work, or I shouldn't say statement of work at this point, but about the RFP. They'll ask me questions about the design, about the delivery, what they can and can't do. And I may not even answer the questions that day. I may take everybody's questions that day, go back to with my team, strategically answer it because we want to make sure we get the best deal. But then we send the answers out to everyone, regardless of who asked the question. Even if you ask no questions, you will get all of the responses. And the idea is that is a couple things. It'll save me time because I won't have to wait. Well, it's like if 15 people emailed me about the same question or called me, I don't have to answer it all the time. I can just answer it once and everybody gets it. And it also minimizes the fact that somebody might say, well, hey, you gave all of this person all this extra information about how they can best create a proposal, and you didn't tell me. You're showing favoritism. You really just want to hire that vendor. It reduces my liability of being sued for that. So that's
I've been on the end of the person who writes up all the answers.
Oh, okay. So there you go. So yeah. So you get it. And you have to write it.
I've never actually gone to the conference.
Okay. So yeah. So that's what it is. And for PMI, again, it's to save you time and to reduce your liability of litigation. Now on the slides, it has 2 bullet points. We talk about advertising, which is true, because now we can let folks know that, hey, not only is our RFP out, please bid on it, but we're also conducting a bidders conference. Please come talk to us and get more information so you're more likely to even submit a proposal. Most government contracts, federal, state, county, and even local, usually require some sort of bidders conference or public disclosure. So, questions that come out, they have to be disclosed to everybody. It has to be on a common forum where everybody gets it and everybody can see it and there's public access. So you'll usually see that. And so PMI does that because PMI is sort of hand in hand with the federal government, and federal procurements will have bidders conferences. Okay, other tools and techniques is your expert judgment. Pretty straightforward. Lean on your expertise or the expertise of others to help figure out, which sellers you want to bring on the team. You may analyze data, and that just could be source selection criteria that you chose, and the size of the company or their ability to provide resources or scale at a moment's notice, things like that. And again, it's alluding to the fact that procurement usually handles these negotiations, but the team is responsible to ensure that there's sort of some cohesiveness. So you as a PM kind of have your foot on both sides. You're working with the vendor that is going to do good work, and you want them to be able to get a contract. So you're telling them, hey, when you submit it, make sure you do X, Y, and Z. Don't violate 1, 2, and 3, or else the folks in our contracting are going to kick it back to you. And then on the other side, you're working with folks in purchasing and supply chain to say, hey, can you be a little lenient? This is a good company. I know they're not the cheapest, but it's the best for the project. So you're doing what's best for the project. Purchasing wants to always get the cheapest deal, but that's not always what's best. The vendors always want to make the most money, and that's not best for the company. So you kind of have to play both roles, and that's the idea here. We're responsible to ensure the contract meets the project's needs. So the project, right? We're beholden to the project and the project only.